Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'll just give everyone just a minute or so as people keep coming into our session today. And while we're waiting, it would be beautiful for you to hop in the chat and just tell us where you're joining from and tell us what you can see out your window today. Given our country of extremes, it's either pouring down rain or beautiful sunshine, fire, or could be many things. Excellent. Well, we might get started. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing your screen, Ree. I might just get you to stop sharing that. Beautiful. Well, welcome everyone to our final day, day 3 of our forum for mainstreaming education for the SDGs in higher education. My name is Belinda Gibbons, and I am the outgoing chair of the Australia and New Zealand chapter for Principles of Responsible Management Education. And I'm honoured for our session today to be chaired by Rob Hales from Griffith, who is the incoming chair of Prime for our gorgeous region. And we are just so delighted to be able to partner with the SDSN and ACS for this event. And we've had an amazing couple of days if you've been able to join us for our sessions on Tuesday and Wednesday, and just some amazing action and initiatives have been covered on those pretty full days. And today in particular, we really wanted to focus in on one of the hottest topics around in higher education in regards to teaching and learning, but also research and operation and governance of universities, is around climate action. And so before I hand over, I would just like to acknowledge that the absolutely beautiful lands on which I'm joining you from today is Ndarawa land on Yuin Nation, and it'd be wonderful if you could pop in the chat what lands you are joining us from, and I pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal friends and colleagues that might be joining us. And I guess get us to reflect for just a few seconds on our beautiful country, especially as we are about to begin talking about climate and its interconnectedness, with everything we do and are. So thank you for joining us today for this really lovely conversation. I urge you to, as we're going through today, Tal or Ree and myself will really encourage you to put your examples in the chat, or to ask questions in the chat as we go through. With this platform that we're using today, the registrations don't actually collect your email address. So we'll pop a link in the chat there if you'd like to receive the recordings, and then we can monitor that for you. So enjoy the chat and the forum within the forum, I guess, on the side there. And I am going to pass over to Rob, and we'll get started on our a really important discussion today. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the opportunity to be able to host this. We've got 5 wonderful speakers coming up, and I won't spend too much time talking myself. But beforehand, I'd just like to acknowledge this is a very important topic if we think about the SDGs and climate action and research that's gone to look at the interconnectedness of climate action. It has the greatest impact on all of the other SDGs, greater than any other SDG. So if we do address climate change, we address many other of the SDGs. So I think that's quite important, and that's why I think it's a great timely topic to talk about today. The other reason why it's a very important topic is that the SDGs and climate action give a normative framework for us to act, instead of it being placed back on individual universities, individual lecturers, course conveners and program directors to be able to say this is important. We have an international framework to be able to say that this is an important aspect. And SDSN, if I may plug the SDSN, most institutions across Australia, universities are actually signatories to that. So therefore, we're all signatories to the SDGs by default. So with PRME, it's a United Nations initiative formed many years ago, and we had Griffith University and La Trobe being the first signatories in Australia in 2008. And since then, we've grown to be a fantastic group of institutions, business schools in particular, looking at sustainability, and SDGs are the main focus at the moment for that group. I've taken over the chair role, and I call myself a co-chair because we have Jackie King from Melbourne, who's the vice chair, but we're doing that together in the spirit of collaboration. So yes, it's a very political topic. If we think about the climate protests a couple of years ago, very political, and thinking about my son who went out and took some school time off, and then the response from the Prime Minister to say they should be back in school indicates that this is a hot topic, and there's going to be very interesting initiatives that we're going to hear about today that address this not necessarily political topic, because we don't necessarily have to deal with it in that way, but definitely it has a political context and a larger mission that we do have to acknowledge here. So we have 5 wonderful speakers, and these speakers will be talking about their initiatives, but there's going to be 2 questions that I'll be asking at the end of these speakers, and that'll kick off the discussion. So we'll talk about the important factors that enable them to undertake their initiatives and think about the greatest challenge that they're facing. So these 2 questions will be in the back of their mind as they present. Okay, so first up, we have Associate Professor Kristen MacKenzie-Shalders from Bond University talking about her initiative.
Thank you. I'm going to start with some context first. So as Rob mentioned, thank you. I'm Kristen MacKenzie-Shalders, and I'm the Food Service Domain Lead at Bond University, and I'm also the Sustainability Chair for our Faculty Health Sciences and Medicine Advisory Committee. I acknowledge the Kumbamerri people of the Yugambeh language, upon whose ancestral lands I live and work, and pay my respect to elders past and present. I also believe First Nations people and their traditional ways of knowing, doing and being are fundamental for our planetary health. Nutrition and dietetics and many health disciplines in general teach many concepts that are translatable to climate action. For example, behaviour change, systems thinking, management and leadership, and more recently, advocacy. But we know that climate action requires not just advocacy, but activism. Recently, the dietetics deans of programs, so the head of all our schools, did a collective futures project where they explained that our discipline needs to nurture our graduates to be, and our discipline to be change makers, activists and disruptors, which is very important for climate action, but doesn't come naturally in our profession, and it's very hard to teach and learn. So while we're well placed to take small steps in climate action, there are good examples of this occurring broadly. Broad, sweeping, transformational change is harder. So we know that the human population is healthier than ever before, with increased life expectancy and decreased poverty and child mortality, but we have exploited the planet at an unprecedented rate to achieve this. Look, depending on what metrics you look at, healthcare in Australia contributes 7% of national carbon emissions, and globally the food system around 25%, sorry. The World Health Organization has climate change as one of the top global threats to human health, and estimates 23% of all annual global deaths can be attributed or linked to the environment. Various health bodies have declared a climate emergency, and despite this, there's still misunderstanding whether climate change is health practitioners' responsibility, and sometimes a narrow view constituting human health. Research also tells us that health professionals feel ill-equipped and lack confidence to teach sustainability. Terminology is tricky in this area, and climate action is absolutely critical, as Rob discussed. We do often talk more broadly in some health spaces also around planetary health, which is the health of human civilization and the natural system on which it depends, because this is really translatable and relatable for health practitioners. And of course, we also talk about climate action as part of the Sustainable Development Goals. So within the Master of Nutrition and Dietetic Practice program, the key for our program has been integration and mapping of concepts. So for example, for climate action, things like understanding food miles and paddock to plate concepts are critical. We integrate teachings into assessment. So for example, when students do a product review, we look at a sustainability component. We do various lectures and workshops and talk about the importance of action. Placements and internships as well. All students do sustainability questionnaires, and we make a commitment to and train students and supervisors on the SDGs and research as well. So for example, Grace, one of my current students who may be online, is currently doing a letter to editor to our primary discipline journal on a student's perspective on actions students need to take on climate action and planetary health, a form of activism which we're nurturing. Just one example activity, we have groups of students that we break into the SDGs, and they're allocated in SDGs, one of which is climate action. We ask them to provide examples and discuss with peers how the SDGs relate to dietetic practice. We have collected data post our interventions that tell us that 95% of students were confident or very confident to make dietary recommendations regarding environmental sustainability and climate action, and believe it should be within their scope of practice. Thank you for the opportunity to present in this interdisciplinary forum. It will take the combined actions of all 7.8 billion people alive to ensure that a child born today is not defined by a changing climate. So as discussed yesterday, we can't do this alone. I'll pop a few links in the chat.
Thanks very much. Thanks so much, Kristen. There's some really interesting things you've said there. I've jotted down a couple of points here I'd love to ask you some questions about, and feel free in the chat also to add those questions now, and we can kick that question time off once we have all of our 5 speakers give their presentation. The next speaker we have is Professor Marjo Lips-Wiersma from the University of Auckland Technology. Auckland University of Technology is the correct pronunciation. And yeah, thank you for coming along today and sharing your initiative.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Kia ora, everybody from New Zealand. We have a reasonably long history of having sustainability courses integrated in the business curriculum, all the way, it's core to the curriculum, all the way from the MBA to first-year students. But recently, so I'm going to talk a bit about what we're actually doing in the classroom. And recently, as teachers, we are a team of sustainability teachers. We noted and chatted about how in our classes and in ourselves, we noticed increasing eco-anxiety in relation to climate change. And we did some research and found that we were not alone in noticing this. The Australian Psychological Society observed that the threat of climate change provokes difficult emotions, including fear, anger, guilt, shame, grief, loss, helplessness. And the American Psychology Association reports that 48% of the respondents between 18 and 34 experience stress over climate change in their daily lives. And so we started to document a little bit what we were seeing in our students, but also how we were responding to some of this anxiety. Some of the student comments that I noted down was, it's a concern, but there's nothing I can do about it, so I try not to think about it. After the first lecture, I went home, went to bed, had a dream about the world closing in on me. Or simply, why should I care? So we see a range of emotions having to do with anxiety, including apathy, of just stepping right back. And we did not want our students to lose a sense of hope and agency. And we started to wonder how we could co-create some sense of hope in the presence of anxiety and despair, without, of course, minimizing the scale and impact of the environmental facts. We found it really helpful that other researchers and teachers had started to embark on a similar journey and started to make some useful distinctions, particularly what hope is not. And they defined what hope is not, if you like, as naive, uninformed, and depoliticized optimism. And we saw some of that naive optimism, depoliticized optimism in our classrooms, like a student saying there was nothing to worry about because technology would save us all, that recycling is still the main solution to all problems that we face. And we also had some students who came up with some lovely creative solutions like that we could just colonize other planets. But we also saw that in our own, because we were dealing with these anxious emotions, that we were having some naive and optimistic responses where we would focus on business opportunities and discuss a lot of environmental success stories while we were not really addressing the current political, economic, and corporate structures. And this naive optimism on our side often made that the solutions we were offering were not really matching the scale of the problem. And increasingly, of course, students were also starting to pull us up, and we were already very aware of this ourselves as well. So while there were problems with hope and with anxiety and despair, but also with hope, we did recognize it was really important to keep hope in the classroom, because when it is not naive, hope can play a significant role in creating a sustainable future. Without hope, challenges are insurmountable. There's no reason to act, and intellectual discernment and critical thinking often become just cynicism. So we had to keep the hope in the classroom, and we were also not wanting to solely be responsible for it anymore. So we actually wondered, how are we going to share this felt responsibility on our side to take students out of despair and make it more of a shared responsibility, because we were also getting quite exhausted ourselves of somehow keeping the hope up while we were getting quite anxious as well. And we arrived at several practices around that, and we're currently practicing having that at our fingertips. And we're also trying to practice some of those practices in our assessment. And so for now, we find that it works really well to share hope with the students and despair with the students, rather than us feeling responsible for keeping the spirits up in this classroom, rather, or that we try to alleviate negative emotions. We have found that it's actually really useful to have those present so that students feel, hey, it's not just me, it is shared, even my lecturers are sharing it. We have included course readings on hope and despair so that the students and ourselves get more language for those feelings. We have connected more system solutions to practices. We were already doing that, but we are doing that much more regularly at the moment. We're talking more about non-individualized. We found that students get despair more when they start to individualize the solutions, like I can't do anything about it, and they're not that good yet at what they could collectively do. It gets a little bit better with now the students who have been in those protests, as the previous speaker also talked about, but look more at non-individualized, more disruptive, more non-business solutions as well, like joining political community movements. And we are getting more skilled at facilitating the discussions, where students can see that both their hope and their despair is actually very valid and widely shared. But perhaps our most important learning was that amongst ourselves, we started to deliberately and consciously have collegial conversations about our frustrations and challenges and opportunities of teaching sustainability in the current time. And that we also had experienced that we weren't alone in dealing with all of these emotions that are currently in the classroom. And so we found it incredibly helpful to give each other support and create a sense of shared responsibility in this emotional roller coaster of sustainability learning and teaching. So yeah, great to be part also again of a collective forum where we can talk about some of these issues that we face together and have some pedagogical and other exchanges. Thank you for inviting me to be here.
Thank you very much, and really interesting to dive into that issue of hope and despair, or despair and hope, because I think we all, anyone who is interested in climate change, and if you've been interested in it for quite some time, you have to deal with this, because it's very difficult to continue on if despair does take over and the hope drains out. So very interesting there, and very interested to have a discussion, particularly when we're talking about all the other sort of action competent activities that we heard from the previous speaker as well, how that can actually assist that problem that we do face when we're talking about climate change. Next, we have our speaker from ClimateWorks Australia, Minalee Busi, and going to be speaking about some great work that ClimateWorks have done on climate change.
Thanks, Robert. Hi, everyone. Really nice to be here, and thank you so much for having me on the panel. I'm really excited about hearing all the initiatives you guys have, and also very keen to share what we at ClimateWorks are doing. I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying respects to the traditional owners and elders past and present of the lands and waters of the people of the Kulin Nation from where I'm joining. So I'm Minalee. I'm a project officer working from the Sustainable Corporate System in ClimateWorks. So ClimateWorks works within the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, and we are working towards accelerating the transition to net zero emissions for Australia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. So apart from the research, analysis, and engagement that we already do, we deliver a master's level unit called the Climate Change and Carbon Management Strategies through Monash Business School. The unit attracts around 100+ students each term who are generally enrolled in business, finance, and accounting courses. So students who do not have prior knowledge on climate change. And we also attract students from other disciplines such as Master of Environment and Sustainability, which sits under the Monash Sustainable Development Institute. So we also have students who do have some prior understanding and knowledge on this topic. We see these students as conduits of best practice business action that is required from businesses in order to effectively reduce their emissions in line with the Paris Agreement, and also as a means to respond to the various physical and transitional risks and opportunities that climate change presents for both businesses and our economy at large. And since the unit is delivered by ClimateWorks, we believe we sit in a unique position to be able to translate and transfer the research that we as an organization undertake. So our aim through this unit is really to be able to equip students with the knowledge, concepts, and frameworks that they can confidently carry forward to businesses as they step into corporate roles. Our assignments have a major research focus, so they can apply the concepts that they have learned in the lectures, and they can apply them in a business context as well. Due to the incredible amount of advocacy in the climate action space, the wheels are turning quite quickly and rapidly on businesses, and we are having to keep up with the pace, which is quite exciting. So a major shift in the way we have delivered the unit is us being able to create the awareness on the need for raising the ambition of corporate climate action through the concepts and frameworks as we discuss in the unit. And we especially do this by strongly advocating for the need for corporate climate action to be in line with a 1.5 degree trajectory as opposed to a 2 degree future warming trajectory. We also aim to provide students with the opportunity to interact with corporate leaders who act and advocate for the same. And we do this by hosting a corporate leaders panel in one of our lectures. And this is it's quite attractive for students really, since they can network and hear about the professional journey of these guest speakers, and also take inspiration to be able to be the change makers in the corporate action space. Tutorials, we have tutorials as a major part of our unit. So students work in group assignments where they are provided with business case studies. And we have found that students really quite enjoy having those business case studies to be able to apply the theory and concepts that they learn in lectures and translate that to actual real world action. So during these tutorials, we take them through the process of creating a carbon management strategy, which is grounded in science-based commitments and actions. And as some of the speakers are discussing previously, the topic can be quite dire. So the lectures and especially the tutorials are an important way for us to be able to create that safe space for both students and the professionals who are delivering the unit, the tutors and the lectures, to be able to come together, discuss and reflect on the learnings. We believe that the more awareness we create on the urgency of the business response that is required this decade, the more we move towards enabling action and enabling change. So yeah, this is our way of mainstreaming SDG 13 in higher education. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's really interesting to hear that as almost the social license shifts, and perceptions and attitudes towards climate change in the general community rises, you've been able to increase the imperatives and the priorities and the importance of your curriculum. That was really interesting to hear. Yeah, so thank you very much, Minalee. And we'll move on to our next speaker. And the next speaker is Wiebke Ebeling from University of Western Australia.
Hello, everybody. I'm inclined to say good morning, but that obviously isn't true for everyone. So I'm Wiebke Ebeling. I'm the center manager of a group that is now called Marine Energy Research Australia. We've recently rebranded because we do more than wave energy. So originally we were the Wave Energy Research Centre, which was founded in late 2017, early 2018, under Western Australian government funding. And the funding scheme is called Royalties for Regions. So they get the idea that it is a reinvestment in regional WA. And so the point is, well, there's 2 points really. So one is, as a research centre, we have a strong academic track record for UWA, so the University of Western Australia, that was in the offshore ocean engineering sector. And as you can probably imagine, it was mostly offshore oil and gas. But it is now recognized that, we can't just transition into renewables with ditching all the workforce that we already had. It's actually really valuable to harness these skills and repurpose them for a clean energy future. So in offshore oil and gas, we have highly skilled workers who can work in offshore renewable energy technology projects. So we work with industry to transition them, to help them transition. So building on that UWA track record, we're now working in the clean energy space. But with the state government funding came a mandate to do a lot of, the community work, to spread the message, student engagement, public outreach, effectively the social license to run these projects in the region. Now, luckily, that is my passion. So it was great that it came with that mandate. It's lovely to hear all the other speakers who sort of go in all guns blazing to fight for this better future. And I mean, ultimately we do too, but it is a very academic exercise. Academics can keep themselves busy looking at data. The fact that it is for a good cause is great, but I do acknowledge that the ultimate motivation of the research center is probably a little less noble than in other cases. But the actions count. So I want to present to you a project that we've been running for the last couple of years. And so going back to Rob's intro to the whole session, he said well, climate change is like the SDG that, is kind of overpowering all the others. This project too, and this activity in particular, is sort of exactly that, where you do climate action by stealth. There's a lot of audiences who don't want to hear about climate change. But you can run an activity that is engaging and that talks about a lot of other aspects, and ultimately still you do climate action. So I'm going to share my screen, conscious that I'm the first one to do this. So hopefully this all works. And Rob will scream at me if it doesn't. So what I'm presenting to you here is a snapshot of the activity on one slide. So the activity is called Wave Hello to Renewable Energy. And it's quite an experiential activity. It's hands-on. We've got water tanks and a couple of gadgets like plastic vegetation and a chopping board, effectively, which is a wave pedal, and 3D printed gadgets that are wave energy converter models. So kids and really audience of all ages can get an idea of the technology behind harnessing clean energy from oceans, be it from waves or tidal or offshore wind effectively. So, getting hands wet helps a lot in the actual learning. So this hands-on face-to-face, obviously vastly hampered by COVID, but generally is so valuable and so impactful. So we started with a very small grant from a Commonwealth-funded organization called Inspiring Australia. So with very modest amounts of money, we built the tank, we built the 3D gadgets, and we've been running it for the last 2.5 years, I suppose. And as I said, like, it started as this, well, we have to spread the message about what we do in ocean renewable energy. What's the potential for Albany, where I'm situated, which is in southern Western Australia. But ultimately, as we did this, you can't work in a small community without working with the small community, which is lovely. So we formed all these community partnerships to do this. So we worked with a tourism operator, which is the historic whaling station in Albany. We worked with a volunteer science professionals organization called the Great Southern Science Council. We worked with the city of Albany for their events like the Maritime Festival. And I'm also part of an industry-led cluster called the Australian Ocean Energy Group. So we get industry reps into the picture as well. So ultimately, this already existed. Now, coincidentally, at pretty much the same time, the university picked up the center they got awarded. Well, awarded sounds a bit more flattering than it was. That anyway, the scheme that they adopted, which is the United Nations Regional Center of Expertise in Education for Sustainable Development, the longest name on earth. And this center, the RC, is supposed to do exactly that, have a combination of formal education providers, like the university or like schools, informal and non-formal providers. And together they come for the common cause and a project, and they roll this out. And that's exactly what we've done. So this project, you could think about it as like, oh, it's, clean energy, obviously. It's also infrastructure and innovation. It's also education. It's also life below water, like that. It taps into a lot of the SDGs, as Rob was saying in the beginning. So I've put a couple of those pictures up there. And I'll stop sharing now so I can actually see your faces again when I end my talk. So the project was an organic fit under that scheme. And now we're running it as the first pilot project under that scheme in southern Western Australia and Albany. But ultimately, it will sort of be a bit of a guide and best practice how to roll it out in regional WA more broadly in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wiebke. Really interesting. It's really interesting to see the project by stealth that you outlined there. And the actual choice of the question and the choice of the project mission, it addresses those larger political imperatives and larger imperatives at that meta goals area. So I think a lot of the work that's happening across Australia and the world is like that. I've just noticed, I've been looking at this issue for over 20 years now, and you can't keep up with the amount of work that's happening around Australia and the world. Okay, so our next speaker is Roxane Valier-Brasier from the University of Queensland. And I have a feeling Roxane is going to be talking very much about the climate literacy program. Over to you.
Hello. Hello, thank you very much. I'm very honored to be part of this panel. My name is Roxane Valier-Brasier, and I'm the principal consultant on sustainability project for the University of Queensland Business School, which is located on the Turrbal lands. So like lots of business school, we've started this journey of embedding SDGs into our curriculum, and it's still a work in progress, but we observed a relatively slow process too. So some colleagues and I were really on the look for a quicker way to fill the gap and promote awareness on climate change and related sustainability issues, and encourage quick mitigation actions within our program offerings. So we decided to be on this journey to develop a micro-credential that we call the UQ Carbon Literacy Program. So it's in a nutshell, a learning solution that involves anyone really, people and organizations from all sectors, all walks on life, and collaborating to understand, to disseminate, and also to act on climate change. So it involves 8 hours of blended learning. We have 5 self-paced online modules together of 2 hours, and 4 live seminars together of 6 hours. And learners then spend 2 additional hours making pledges, an individual and a collective group pledge, committing to reduce their carbon emission and ecological footprint. And then they need to write an assessment to describe those if they want to become certified. So in a sense, we call it and promote it as a day for change. The business school piloted the program with 15 learners in June 2021. And the program officially launched during the University of Queensland Sustainability Week in August 2021. And since then, we've trained more than 200 participants. They all became certified carbon literate. And we have now an objective of training 1,000 by the end of the year. Participants are extremely satisfied so far with the program. A lot of them say they would recommend it. They feel well informed about climate change and its consequences. And also to echo on what Marjo was saying on climate anxiety and loss of hope, we find it does help participants rooting themselves into action straight away and into also a community of support and action. And what's really rewarding for us also is to see that the program does create change in the sense that each participant on average pledges roughly 2,000 kilos of carbon savings. So they do feel empowered to take action and actually do move to action thanks to the program. We didn't do this alone. We partnered with a UK-based not-for-profit organization called the Carbon Literacy Project. They have been in the field to disseminate carbon literacy since 2013, and they have developed standards that you need to comply with as a course developer. So UQ now has its own accredited course tailored to the Australian context. Most recently, we have developed another accredited course tailored to the Indian context to be able to train universities partners based in the country. And UQ Business School itself is now a certified carbon literate organization because it's also a pathway. As an organization, as a department, you can become carbon literate if you've reached a certain level of certain thresholds of participants. To scale the program, and this is our main challenge with getting financial support, we rely on a powerful community of carbon pledgers, the people we train. So once certified, participants get the opportunity to attend a train the trainer program where they are equipped with the knowledge to become facilitators themselves, and then they can support the rollout of the program. And it's based on a peer-to-peer philosophy. Climate change and other related issues affecting everyone. The idea is also for everyone who wishes to do that to be empowered to disseminate the knowledge they gained. It is also a way to meet our goal, which is ultimately to bring awareness as rapidly as we can on these issues. And for students, we find it's also a great employability opportunity because they can get hired to become facilitators. And it also fulfills one of our mission, which is to equip them to become really key players in the transformation we need to build a zero carbon economy. And we believe the program really contributes to do that. The program aligns with SDG 11, SDG 13, SDG 17. Partnerships are key. So we are joining forces with other Australian universities to create a bigger impact. So to enable the rapid distribution and the dissemination of the learning solution, UQ has licensed the program under Creative Commons attribution. And to date, Deakin University Business School organized the pilot in November. by using our materials, and we have started discussions with other universities who were interested. So please feel free to reach out if you are interested, and happy to take any question. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic to hear our last initiative there, and really interesting to hear the train the trainer and open license approach to try and facilitate climate change literacy and carbon literacy across universities, which is fantastic. It reminds me of having done Al Gore's training, and it reminds me of that movement also. So it's good to pick up on that that idea, and it's also good. Just thinking about taking over from my position as taking over the chair with Jackie in terms of PRME, thinking about what aspects of universities do we all share in common. I mean, universities with its change in the landscape in the last 10 to 15 years means we're slightly competitive. But there are things that we actually need to look at which are common across all of the universities. And I think this is one of those issues that cuts across, that we all need to be doing it and we all need to be sharing. And that was one of the themes that I picked up in the speakers of today. There were a few themes. There was people talking about the increased social license that we have, and that allows us to engage at a level that we think is appropriate to match the problem. I think that's coming through very strongly. I think the second thing is that we do have to watch that despair, hope trap that we can all fall into. And there are a number of great solutions that we found today in those initiatives that address that problem. And one of those things that reminds me of Jensen's 2006 article on action competence and how that is a way of cutting through that despair, hope problem that we find. The other one that comes in a little bit in the last speaker, but and also across all, is about that community side of things that addresses our capacity slightly to look at that despair problem, but also to match the problem. And I think that's really important. And the last point I saw that was across all four was this idea of integration. So we've got the initiative, but also integrating it into the institution that we find ourselves in. So I think there are some really great presentations, some really great take homes there. I think I should do justice to the question. There's only one question that came up in the question and answer. I might go to Marjo. It's a question for you in the Q&A. We'll get that answered first, and then we'll go to the general ones. So the question is, how do you answer that question from students about the solution you point to not matching the scale of the problem? I have issues a lot with that student, with those types of students. So,
yeah, I think as we got those questions more and we did more reflective, practice amongst ourselves, one of the things that we started to look for was examples of companies that do something both at a sort of a local scale, but also address some systems issues. So, for instance, Unilever, does whatever Unilever does, but it also has something now on its website that says in all countries we pay the taxes that we are owed, and so to kind of look for, that we ourselves started to find better examples. And also I wanted to acknowledge what people have said, the link between hope and action. So we have a reading from Joanna Macy. She has a book, a thin book, which appeals to students, called Active Hope. And that talks about how hope comes from action. But we did that a lot. We had a lot of student projects. We recognized that quite early in our program, like 7 or 8 years ago. But we are finding that if the action is only within organizations, like even within a university, it starts to, the action that students take is not systems action. So, then we'll do something like, well, why don't we get all free-range eggs in all the restaurants in this university? But then they're not connecting it to the bigger system of why is free-range eggs just not the norm in New Zealand, And so it had to then again, so I think Active Hope, getting students to do something, having a positive experience where they can make a difference. We do now only have free-range eggs at AUT, but also going beyond that and getting them to do systems work. And I think that has been our main challenge in this, where we've said, you want you want corporations to do systems work and start critiquing the systems in which they are operating. But are you actually becoming part of the system, or are you still taking more individualized or organizational action? But what systems, like a community, like a political party, like some active form of activism beyond this university, are you becoming part of? And that seems to break through some of that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think just following on from your point there, I think if I was to add a fifth point in terms of my summary, I think I would add the external and how that actually activates that that issue that you're talking about. And it also helps with the integration and justification of the program, and also ultimately action on climate change. It's a very important thing. So I've just popped up the questions that I'm going to ask, and I'll just open it up to anyone who wants to reply. So the questions are, what has been the most important fact that enabled you to undertake your initiative, and what has been the greatest challenge that you've faced or are still facing? So I'll just open it up. I won't point the finger at anyone. So if someone wants to raise their hand physically as a speaker, and we'll take your response. Okay, Wiebke.
Okay, thank you. I'll just take it for the team to start. So for us, so I've just introduced the activity. Obviously, it's hands-on and very experiential. And I explained about the community partnerships. That's for me really the key factors. So if you run it by yourself, which in a small regional community kind of can't anyway, which is a luxury problem to have. So as you run it as a community project, everyone feels more engaged, has more ownership of it. We're really pitching Albany as a place of innovation where clean renewable energy might be like the hotspot in Australia. And for a small community where a lot of our high school students have no aspiration to go to university, have no idea that there can be careers beyond, you know, their family farming background, there's a lot of stories to tell around, like we really just use our project as like this seed of a bigger picture to talk to them about, like just careers generally and education generally. So that's very empowering. And we do get a lot of cross promotion, cross fertilization by using our partnerships. Like if we put a promo on Facebook and our A-frame out the door saying public lecture, we might get 20 people, but working with the community obviously reaches out to also, and this is a very important point I want to make, is reaching a little bit beyond that preaching to the converted stage, because often, we have this audience of people who give you the lovely nod and smile and you go like, it's great, but I also really need to talk to, the voters out there, the people who still need to hear a message to, cause behavioral change. And that's where, you need leveraged and hinging kind of moments to make that happen. So that for me is a very important, it's actually branching to the next question though, because it's also a challenge.
Yeah, I was going to ask that in terms of the challenge. It's always difficult, isn't it?
Yes.
So how did you overcome that? With any things that you found that overcame that, linking with the externals and making it, greater than just what your organization wanted to do?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say we have fully overcome it yet. I think it's an ongoing effort. So one is the stealth approach, where you sort of say like, hey, we're talking about Albany as this place of innovation, where people, that's interesting to them, that's empowering. So you can talk about climate change a little further down the track. And, we might get a little bit more of a mandate now from federal government, which is otherwise not too much into renewables, but the new dogma is technology over taxes. So ocean renewables being an emergent tech rather than like solar panels and onshore wind, we always face that criticism of why would you invest in something that's emerging rather than just rolling out what we already do and what we're good at. So, but I would say it's ongoing. We're still trying to reach out broader.
Great. Thanks very much. Anyone else like to? Thanks, Kristen.
I think as nutrition and dietetics, we're an accredited profession. And one of the biggest, I guess, enablers or one of the biggest factors in success has been going to the accrediting body to lobby and make sure that our competencies that all the programs are accredited against recognise climate action and sustainability. so that we're getting that sort of broader action, because accreditation, it sort of dictates what we teach in a lot of ways, particularly on courses are so content heavy and, you know, like everything's sort of vying for space. And so that part of it's been really, really important. And also, I sit on the Food and Environment Interest Group, which sort of advocates to Dietitians Australia, our professional body, around matters related to climate change and environmental sustainability. And even things like, so our Dietitians Australia strategic plan is currently being reviewed. So, you know, that group, we're lobbying to make sure that, you know, these concepts or these things are covered in that strategic plan, so that our discipline, you know, invests in that area. So I think that's been a really critical part of this. Yeah, I don't know if you want to talk about.
Yeah, so yeah, it's really interesting that we do sit within these institutions, and it's a crowded curriculum, and we do have those imperatives of you know, standards and accreditation we have to work with, and it's a negotiation process. It's something that you can't give up on. You have to put a lot of energy into it and maintain that energy for that direction and that change. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Anyone like to go next? Minalee.
Thank you. I would say that the collaboration between Monash and ClimateWorks was really important for us to be able to realize that the need for, you know, educating students on this topic was really dire, and it was high time we you know, translate the research that we have been doing at ClimateWorks, and to be able to present that as a solution to students, really, that and linking back to the concept of you know, students feeling despair when talking about climate change. So we are really trying to root the climate action in scientific commitments, in the modeling that we have done in ClimateWorks, to be able to say that we can reach net zero in line with 1.5 degree trajectory, and we have the solutions and we have the emerging technologies that can lead us there. And it's the matter of businesses to be able to raise their ambition and make those commitments in line with these trajectories and pathways that we have developed. And students find it really quite interesting to be able to, again, understand what is required from businesses, and also to take it as a framework which can be used as a best practice standard. So no matter into which organization we go, we are normalizing the concept of science-based commitments and targets. And what we really encourage through the unit is not just commitments of long-term net zero target, but also medium-term actions and commitments. So we are really touching upon some of these concepts of greenwashing that is rampant across organizations. So we want to ensure that students, and so these are really professionals that will be going and working in the space, that they understand that commitments are they are good, they have been working so far, but now really is the time to make those interim midterm commitments and also follow them up with the actions that is required. And also one of the I guess challenges we have seen in this space is everything develops so rapidly every year with the different concepts and frameworks that is required by businesses that they need to report to shareholders and stakeholders. So keeping up with the changes and developments that are happening. And yeah, I guess setting that best practice standard is in that sense, it's really useful for students to build on, and no matter the changes and in the regulations, they can build off this foundation for corporates.
Yeah, it's interesting, some of the shifts in other countries in terms of the standards on climate disclosure, and you know, it may depend on elections as to whether it happens in Australia but in other countries that's happening. One question, because of, you may know that I've got an interest in net zero emissions and some work I did last year with Global Compact. I think there's only about 36 companies that have signed up to science-based targets, and obviously, you know, it costs money to do that. So there are other companies that are actually doing it, but you know, they probably meet that standard, but they haven't signed up. How do you find the challenge of talking to students about trying to meet those net zero commitments in organisations, and how do you equip them? It might be too big a question to answer right now, but there's a challenge there, I think, because you're putting together a net zero emissions course, basically. Is that a challenge to help them through that, negotiate that pathway and get them ready for it?
Yeah, I think so. At ClimateWorks, we have an initiative called Net Zero Momentum Tracker, which I've been a part of, where we assess climate commitments of Australian corporates and their net zero commitments, and we do the research and analysis to see if they are in line with best practice, and if they are in line with the 1.5 degree trajectory that is required. So during this process, we not only looked at the commitments, but like I was saying, it was about the interim targets and the actions that they are undertaking. So we have something called a 4 pillars framework that ClimateWorks often advocates for in terms of taking business action. And this really is a framework which says that the 4 pillars. So the first would be energy efficiency. The second is renewable energy. Third is electrification and fuel switching. And 4 is offsets. So these are the 4 pillars that organizations can really work off towards in achieving their commitments. And we do discuss this all the time with students, that yes, we have seen commitments from companies, and they are far off not science-based commitments, but these are frameworks and actions that organizations can undertake, and in order to be, have that confidence that these are based in science, and they're not just, companies are not just greenwashing.
Yeah, fantastic. And leave it to, we have 2 more speakers. Yeah.
For us, the most instrumental factor to really put in place, implement this initiative was finding allies within the organization who wanted to join forces, and we're happy to put a little bit of time to put together that program and launch it. So that was really the key factor, people. The greatest challenge that we still face is that, and I'm guessing it's a little bit similar to the challenges that other micro-credential programs face, is that it is seen as something extra, or something a little bit outside the classic scope, and for a business school in particular, it is not perceived as core business yet. So we have some advocacy to still do, to actually convince people, and some people in the executive teams, that it is something to take on, and it's actually something to expand on. So we'll still a little bit working on that, on convincing that it has to be a core part of what we deliver as an education provider.
Yeah, it's very interesting, that point about is it core business to the business model of the university or the school that you're in, and that is definitely a challenge. I see Wiebke had a hand up.
Yeah, thought that was a very interesting point too. And so I also work with a government trading enterprise in Australia, and as such, I mean, that one, but I assume a lot of them do, like, embrace the SDGs as an example of a very holistic approach to rolling out a sustainable workforce. And that's why it's so baffling, why it can't be core business. Like, what is, if not this, right? Like, so I'm just I mean, it's hard to talk to politicians at the best of times, but it's, you know, that sometimes it's just, you know, it's so common sense, like to, you know, treat people equitably and to offer them, you know, educational chances, to offer them, you know, equal pay, and to just, so I find that the fact that a university cannot see how they can't be core business is a bit frustrating, but I'm sure you've been there.
Yeah, I'm sure we're all there, all the champions in terms of trying to advance climate change in the curriculum, for sure. I think we have one speaker to go. Marjo, did you want to talk about challenges?
Yeah, I think they're not that different from other universities. We have had sustainability, we call it ERS, ethics, responsibility and sustainability, as core in a lot of our courses. So that was sort of like, if you like, the battle 5 years ago of you know, other courses needing to make space so that this could come in. I think that kind of, we're there, that is not so much an issue for us anymore. The issue for us is, I think, more, how do you adapt common frameworks and common language across all the different business degrees, so that the students don't have a sense of, well, we're discussing this here, but then it's, you know, there's something else somewhere else, like something like weak and strong sustainability. You know, I think that should be something that comes back, whether you're doing economics or accountancy, or it doesn't really matter. And I think that is kind of our next stage of how do you collectivize some of these mindsets, some of this language, some of these ideas, so that the students are not going like this as they are going through their university degrees. And I don't think we're student-centered enough. You know, we have looked from our own different perspectives, and you have the turf wars, and as I said, we're past that. But from the student perspective, what does sustainability teaching and learning look like? And how is it solid and coherent wherever they go?
Yeah, it's a really, really good point, I think. And just thinking about how you've really had a student-focused approach in your initiative over there. And has that been one of the key success factors in making that program that you've put in place work? Has that been one of the key things? Because you can convince institutions that this is what the students not just want, but are moving towards from in sort of pedagogical perspective.
Yeah, I think it has been, and it also has made that we don't get distracted by a whole lot of things, you know, in terms of the student focus. And the second part, and that is not at all separate, is that we have a really diverse student body, including a lot of students from the Pacific Islands, you know, who come in with a lot of questions at the moment around, is my island even still going to be there? And the third part of that is that we have made Indigenous perspectives and worldviews quite central to our teaching. And so we are trying to, what other people have already talked about, you know, Indigenous knowledge, issues of inequality, all this sort of things, that the more we weave all of this together, I think the more successful we are, and the more students get engaged in it as well. So, you know, because you have different hooks for different students, really.
So that's really interesting. And I'm just thinking, we do have a few more minutes here. If any of the panelists want to add a few more things to the conversation that's happened so far, feel free to jump in.
Just because no one else was jumping in, but
I'm sure you're all thinking about extra things. I mean, the initiatives here are amazing to hear, and it's been great to hear you guys share these. Yeah, Wiebke.
I was just starting to type, and I might as well verbalize it though. So just on Marjo's point there, the different sort of angle for each individual student, and that's really what we're finding just with people generally, right? Like you can find what excites them and what makes them feel empowered, and then you can, you know, that can be your initial talking point anyway, and then you can sort of branch out. So for example, for us too, a lot of wave energy technology, for example, can be used for coastal protection. And that ideally is a win-win, because, you know, climate change, we can dampen the fallout, but we can't stop it altogether. So we do need coastal protection measures. And if that becomes clean energy technology, then, you know, ideally that's a win-win. But that's where you can get people who have coastal properties engaged, who kind of fear for their livelihood. And you can sort of say like, well, this can happen here, or, you know, education on a regional campus. So you can sort of say like, what about your child doesn't have to move away for education? What about if we can increase the courses we run here? So yeah, so the different sort of horses for courses kind of approach I find is a very, very good one. And that's where the SDGs, at least you have 17 to choose from. You can find one sort of entrance SDG, and then from there it kind of blossoms into all the others.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. In terms of the SDGs also is that benchmark idea. You've got to absolute, I mean, climate change since 2015 at least, and previous to that we had other agreements, but we had that, you know, ultimate benchmark that everyone's trying to opt in or ratchet up towards, and at the international level, and also, you know, even at the personal level, we're trying to ratchet up. Many of us are changing our lives to ratchet up to that benchmark. So we are quite fortunate in the climate change space in terms of an education realm or domain to have that, because it's quite concrete. So that does help us, but it hasn't overcome totally the idea that we do find it difficult to put as a central concept in the curriculum, like many of you have mentioned there. All right, and looking through the chat here, I'm noticing there's lots of posts here for links as well, which is great because this is recorded, so we can come back in there. And I'm sure SDSN, who is the principal organisers here, have got a record of this and also links, and we'll be able to make you know, people's emails, etc., available if you want to further conversations based on our discussion today. Which has been fantastic. And I think just looking at messages from Tal here, yes, and I should also mention that it's Australian Campuses Towards Sustainability that is the host here as well today. So thanks for putting on a great session, and thank you to all of the individual speakers here. We've had some fantastic talks here, and it hasn't gone unnoticed as well that we do have a bit of a gender bias here as well. And it was one of the questions that I was going to raise in terms of the gender and climate change. That I think that this is a large issue as well. It's one of those entry points in which you can engage, whether it be an SDG target that someone's interested in, or whether it be gender, or whether it be, you know, where the place in which you're finding that climate changing having a direct effect, whether it's the island going under or whatever. They're the entry points in which we can start those critical conversations to be able to lift up to where we need to go. So it's been fantastic to hear all of the speakers today, and I might just hand over to Belinda to finish the session.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks to the panelists today for such an engaging and inspiring session, as all of them have been over the past 3 days. I was just laughing at Jeannie's comment.
Me too.
we might need you as well, Rob. We'll put you in that. We'll put you in our team. Yeah, I'd just like to close off today on behalf of SDSN and ACS and Prime. You know, during this last 3 days, we have seen the need and I guess the desire for transformational immersive change across all our disciplines. And we have seen this highlighted from not only our key speakers, but our panel members, you know, across all the sessions we've had. And I, in particular, I don't know those of you who have joined us in the past forums for the past couple of years, I've really noticed a change in the language and the way that we are talking about not only the framework, but what we need to do and how we need to work together at this, in particular, this forum. So as a group, we have endeavoured to showcase a wide range of disciplines, and it is interesting to have, you know, listened to each of those disciplines bringing up the same challenges and enablers as they've come up over the past couple of days, clearly showing that we can learn from everyone irrespective of our discipline or sector. We have seen this in presentations, particularly, you know, we've talked a lot about cross-university collaborations. We've talked about the need to change accreditation bodies, the need to co-create with community, our Aboriginal peoples, with students. These are really big initiatives and big changes that we're talking about and instigating. So many wonderful initiatives. I urge you to reach out to each other, go back through the agenda and reach out to those that you want to learn more from or those that you want to partner with. SDSN Accent Prime will be sharing a summary of the key points and obviously the recordings once they are available. But we'd also like to hear more about what you would like to listen to in the future. What is it that we need to stay on top of to remain relevant and current in this space? So I'm hoping that one of my lovely colleagues might put a link up to the Menti poll. And if you want to go to Menti or QR code, scan that QR code there, it'll take you just to a Menti poll that will ask you, what else is on your mind? Is there anything else you would like to discuss at this point in time? What are you kind of sitting there still thinking about at the end of today? So we can come back together again and continue these really important conversations. So if you can do that, that would be wonderful. And also, as you know, just if you can hop onto that link with Tal and register your email, just so we can get those recordings to you. So the platform that we use doesn't keep your email address, which is highly unusual given today's cybersecurity issues, but it doesn't keep anything. So if you'd like to receive the recording, just pop your email in there. That would be great. But otherwise, on behalf of SDSN Accent Prime, thank you so much for engaging with us over the last 3 days. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.